go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum present of 6 members. Item C1, consideration, discussion, and possible action regarding an update on School Health Advisory Committee recommendations related to student use of electronic devices,
I don't think we can hear you, Mr. Harris.
health curriculum, and elementary recess. Dr. Ely.
Mr. Harris, members of the board. So yes, we're starting off in item C1 talking about an update on the School Health Advisory Committee recommendations. You'll recall that at the April meeting, the SHAC committee came to the board and made a series of recommendations, as they do annually at the April board meeting. Those recommendations actually fell into 3 general areas. One, they want to talk about the implementation of recess at the elementary level, specifically whether that should be taken away from students as a consequence for not doing work and other things. Second was I want to talk about the health curriculum for our 7th grade health class, and had some recommendations related to that. And the third item had to do with the use of electronic devices for educational or non-educational uses in schools. And there was a number of recommendations made related to that. I know that a number of us have received some follow-up correspondence from both members of the SHAC committee and members of the public regarding the electronic use. So what I want to do is just kind of give an update as to where we are in relation to our work on this. As members of the board know, there are a number of different decisions that can be made in a school district. Some of them are at the board policy level, and some of them are the implementation of the policy, or what we call administrative guidelines. So we're talking with the administration about some of the guidelines that we have specifically in regards to electronic communications and how those are implemented in College Station ISD. As you recall, we became a BYOD, or a Bring Your Own Device district, a number of years ago, when other districts were making the decision to go one-to-one at particular schools or districts. And when I say one-to-one, that's 1 device per student in a school district or in a campus. We looked at this was, again, several years ago. We looked at both pros and cons of going one-to-one and BYOD policies, or doing nothing at that time, and determined that bringing your own device to be able to use to supplement district devices was the way that we wanted to move forward as a school district. Understanding that when you bring devices, that has a number of different issues that have to work through. Those devices, access to the school system, to the Wi-Fi network, to the regular network, the monitoring of the devices that are not on our network, that are on 4G or LTE, are all issues I think that were highlighted by the members of the SHAC committee in their presentation a couple months ago. So we worked through that at that time. We became a BYOD district, and we've been working through that in the years since that time. If I will, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about the specific strategies that were brought forward from the SHAC committee, and there were 5 of them. I'm going to go and I'm going to lump a couple of them together, and I'm going to go in reverse order. So number 5 was parent education. Number 4 was a K-8 technology safety curriculum. And that is something that we have been talking about here in College Station ISD under the title of digital citizenship. Digital citizenship is a part of the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. So that is a technology or knowledge and skills that students have to have at various points throughout their schooling in Texas and in College Station ISD. You may recall that at the board meeting in March, when you approved the district improvement plan, a digital citizenship curriculum was a part of what we had planned for, and part of what you guys as a board approved at that time. And so we are working right now in the school district for a digital citizenship curriculum. And that would be delivered at the elementary level in our camp, computer, art, music, and PE time, when we go through computer 2 or 3 times a week. That would be implemented as some of the technology TEKs at that particular time. And at the 5 through 8 level, that can be implemented at what we call our advisory time, or CAT time, or Pride time, or our different, they're called different things at different campuses. We have ready-made 25 to 30 or longer minute slots daily at our schools at the 5th through 8th grade level, where we can employ these digital citizenship, which would hit Strategy 4, which is a K through 8 technology safety curriculum. And it is giving the kids the skills not to look up things on Google. This is how to be safe in online chat rooms, and how to be safe in email communication. So what do you share and what do you not share? And so that's what we'd be doing moving forward with that. We've got a number of resources that are available to the school district, and so that we are going through with Stephanie Ryan, Shannon Long, and some others in vetting those resources, and intend to have that in place by the beginning of next school year. Kind of going along with that is Strategy 5, parent education. As a part of digital citizenship for students, there are opportunities for increased parent education as well. And so as we look at various resources for student digital citizenship, we want to be able to have some companion parent resources as well. So we're also going through that process this summer, vetting those resources, and intend to bring those to the school district in the 2018-2019 school year. So kind of lumped 4 and 5 together as basically education for students and education for our parents and community. Going back up to Strategy 3, strengthened Wi-Fi filters. We are SIPA compliant, Child Internet Privacy Act compliant. We do filter all of our Wi-Fi and all of our SSIDs, our networks that we have throughout the school system. And even those folks who get on us the public Wi-Fi, like people who are here today, and they select a CSISD public without authentication, that is filtered as well. We have different levels of filtering based on the different areas of the network that we're on, but we do have that right now. What we have been contemplating and we're moving forward with for the 2018-19 school year is authentication of our Wi-Fi. And so that's going to change how things look here in CSISD. So now that we have moved into getting logins for Google Classroom for all of our students, not Gmail, but Google Classroom, each of our students will have ability to log into the network, and they will have their own student ID, which they will use for a login, along with a password. And so students wishing to access the Wi-Fi at our schools or facilities would have to authenticate with their student ID number and password. So it does a couple things. Well, mainly it's a two-factor ID. It just doesn't. It means not anybody is just getting on in those particular instances, and whoever's getting on and going to those particular places, we know who they are. And so we can track it back to a particular user. I think that is going to be much safer for us moving forward. Now we do have, and we'll use this board meeting as an instance, for instance, you go to our facilities for athletic events or fine arts, or you come here to the board meeting, and we have access to public Wi-Fi right now. Anybody can get in without having to type any password or sign acknowledging any user ID or user acceptable use agreement. And so what we would be doing for that authentication is we would be, in the instance of the boardroom, we would be posting and changing periodically the login for people who come to our regular meetings and those types of events. So you would probably see up in the room, you would see what our login is on public for this particular month, or 6-week period or 2-month period, and those would change out on occasion as well. And those, again, are not intended for the students. Those are intended for our guests who come for different activities. So we would be strengthening our Wi-Fi, especially for students, by having that authentication aspect of it, and moving forward with that for 2018-2019. Strategy 1 and 2 really kind of go together. Strategy 1 is talking about revising the electronic device policy to restrict cell phone use on campuses, to approve educational use only, and then Strategy 2 is a consistent application of policies. Basically, it's what policies are we going to have regarding whether students can use their devices for educational use or non-educational use, and then let's have a consistent application of those policies across the school district. We have had one meeting already with an administrative team in regards to all of these strategies that I've been talking about and sharing with you. We have now moved into breakout meetings. In fact, we have elementary principals that are meeting together to discuss what what an appropriate electronic device policy would look like at the elementary level for kindergartners, for fourth graders, for second graders. We've had our 3 intermediate principals have already met to discuss this, because what would it look like at the elementary level? What's the appropriate use for intermediate kids that are not quite elementary but not quite secondary just yet? We also have our 3 middle school principals meeting, and our 3 high school principals will be meeting as well to determine what their thoughts are on this. We're coming back together in the large group next week to discuss the process for those meetings. What I anticipate is that you will see differences between elementary, intermediate, middle, and high school use of devices on campus. Obviously, all of them would be able to be used for educational use, and the possibility of could they be used for non-educational use, and if so, when? Before school, at lunch, not at lunch, during advisory time, not during advisory time, those types of things. And so we're going to have our folks talk about it at those particular levels and come back and meet with the whole group, and then we're going to process that and before we move forward farther in this decision-making process. So we had not every principal was able to be at that meeting, so we wanted to have other folks be able to weigh in and talk about what makes the most sense for College Station ISD in regards to that. What I anticipate happening is you'll see, I know what will happen is we'll have a more consistent application of whatever electronic device use policies and guidelines we have across the district. That will definitely happen because we're meeting to talk about it. And I think you'll see graduated differences between what's appropriate for high school versus what's appropriate for middle school, and elementary, and kind of what are the intermediate steps in between. So we have not finished that work. And so just want to give you an update as kind of how we got everybody together, some of the things that we've wrestled with, some of the things that we tend to move forward with for next year, and some of the conversations that are ongoing and continuing over the next couple of weeks. So I've talked for about 12 minutes or so nonstop, so I'd love to stop and pause and have the board members reflect or ask any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you. Start with some questions.
Has there been any talk about just banning mobile devices in elementary schools altogether?
I'll be interested to see. We had one elementary principal who was representative of the group, so I'll be interested to see what when all 10 of them are able to get together and talk about that. So perhaps they may, but specifically, we have not had that conversation just yet.
Okay. I would just say we've gotten a lot. We've gotten some emails, but you've certainly talked to a number of other people, and I think this is a pretty wide-ranging concern on a lot of levels from a lot of parents, and some much more than others. But I'll obviously be very interested to hear what our educators think about this based on the recommendations that Shaq gave us.
So one of the things that I didn't mention that we have discussed is the possibility of blocking social networking sites through our Wi-Fi. Can we do that? Can we do that all the way across the board? Is there a good reason to do that? Can we do that only for certain logins and those types of things? So we're still looking at that. I think some of the issues that were identified can be traced to social networking and those types of things. And so I think that's one of the things that continues that we're going to continue to look at. Don't know where we'll end up on that, because we also have to look at when you attach to a Wi-Fi network, how does it see teachers versus how does it see guests, how to a high school student versus an elementary student. So we got to work through some of the technological aspects of that.
Well, and they have to be on our Wi-Fi, right, in order to do that, because they could be off our Wi-Fi, right, and still use the device. And
Yes.
I think that how do you even govern that? That to me is I start to ask myself that question. And then we've invested so much like in 24/7, and that's been very popular, and it helps these athletes and other people extracurricularly. I mean, it becomes a very difficult situation to kind of pull apart and try to figure out. I think it may be easier at the elementary level a little bit, but when you get to the high school, I begin to wonder, because there are kids that pay and own and pay for their own phone. So I think it's going to be hard for these teachers to have to spend time policing that too. And I'm not suggesting that we don't do that. I'm just saying, I don't think this is as easy as, no more phones. I don't think it's an easy,
You block all social media sites, and they will find new social media sites. I mean, I think it doesn't take a whole lot of hunting to do that. But that doesn't mean that we should make it easy.
No, I think that you make it hard. I mean, that's what we talk about in high school all the time anyway, with high school kids. And, we talk about the fact that we just make it difficult. We don't give them free rein. You just try to do the best you can that way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the age, can you hear me okay now, Chuck? The age distinction that you talked about, and when you have unsupervised time with the device is important too. I mean, with the realities of high school kids and how a high school functions, that's incredibly difficult, particularly if they're willing to not do it on Wi-Fi. I mean, if you've got a device there, I don't know how you deal with it. I mean, it's just going to be tough. But if you're at an elementary school where they're under more constant supervision, and if you limit it at the times when they're not, like at lunch, I mean, to me, that's a little bit different dynamic. And then I think you mentioned stepping up 5th and 6th and then 7th and 8th. So I do think that is something that I know you all will look at. Is there anything from a policy level? I know you're not done yet, but anything you've seen that we need to do to give you more flexibility?
I've reviewed the policy, and the policy is pretty flexible, and it does allow us to implement whatever guidelines that we deem necessary, and we just need to make sure that whatever guidelines we put into place, we have those in our student handbooks and our code of conducts and those types of avenues. So that's how we have handled that in the past. I would like to say this, kind of following up, Mrs. Bear, on your comment. You're exactly right that there are a lot of what we do on the Wi-Fi is one thing, but kids walking around on their own data plans is something that is certainly hard to control and hard to monitor. And we want our folks to be able to monitor our kids, make sure they're not viewing anything inappropriate or doing anything inappropriate on those devices. When we looked at the 5th through 8th grade levels and got some feedback from some of our principals at those levels, I was surprised to hear, but it does make sense when I thought about it further, that the authentication and locking down of the Wi-Fi system and maybe even blocking potential avenues on our Wi-Fi for students would have a better effect than I maybe gave it a thought at the outset. Our principals are reporting that a lot of our kids are coming and getting on our Wi-Fi and using our Wi-Fi and not their or their parents' data plan. Because you can use that data plan for 1 month, and then we all have lived that. Well, I can't speak for you, but I have lived that personally.
I have to.
And know what those charges can be like. And so we actually do have a lot of our kids who are using that Wi-Fi, and to the extent that we can, especially at the middle grade levels, provide security at that Wi-Fi level, I think we'll have a big impact.
Well, and I think that when you talk about the education of the parents and you explain to them, the less data plan that you give your child, if they stay off the Wi-Fi at school, I mean, to me, we have to work in tandem and say, don't give them unlimited. I mean, there's a part of me that if you really want to monitor this, then you don't give them unlimited data plan, or you monitor that too, and we educate and say, look, this is how maybe we can catch this too. It just becomes, I live the days of no phones. Well, they were on there, but I paid I can't tell you how many $15 I paid. I'd like to tell you not many, but it started coming out of somebody else's pocket, the chores that they had to do for
Like caught.
Oh yeah, they got caught with their phone out in the pocket. It was any time during the day. It was they'd have to turn their phone in, and it was $15 to get it back. And I had 4 kids, so guess how many times I paid for that? Because a bunch, yeah. Well, and I didn't pay all the time because I kind of made it come out of their pocket. Where's your phone? Well, it's in the office until I get $15. Go, okay. And that's a lot for the administrators too, to have to, I mean, that became a problem that way too. I mean, people don't understand how difficult that is and how they have it in there. I'm just saying, they're good with them.
I guess I want to point out that a couple of these strategies, when we're talking about educating our students and educating our parents, I think that is key. Having our kids and our families understand, what is really out there and what are good ways to avoid that. And one of the things that came out from our principal group when we spoke is, we are in the business of education. We need to work with our kids while we have them as they go through our system, as they start younger, and we have a lot more control. So we eventually give a little bit more control and flexibility to students all the way through and help them understand the pitfalls that are out there and help them guide as they go through our school system. Somebody told me this a couple days ago, and it's true. I didn't really think about it, but seniors this year were born in 2001, and not only have they had cell phones all their life, they've had smartphones all their life. So this has been a part of who we are as a society now. It's not flip phones are an anachronism, and I can remember not having a cell phone, but a lot of people can't. So how do we work with our kids and help them to be good consumers and wise users of this media that they're surrounded with all day long? So where we are, Mr. President, members of the board, we're still working on this, and we intend to come back and probably by next meeting and know what we're wanting to do in regards to especially strategy 1 as far as our educational use only and how schools can be used for educational or limited non-educational use and what that might look like at the various grade spans.
What about the recess?
The recess, we'll be getting together with principals to elementary principals is really what we're talking about there and talk about this. Okay.
Okay.
We call that just-in-time professional development. We'll be talking with our folks at the elementary level about that. I think when you ask us as administrators, that's our belief is that kids shouldn't be held out of lunch. Kids should not be held out of recess because the ability to move is so important for kids, especially our younger kids. And we need to give them the opportunity to do that. We need to give them the opportunity to socialize both at lunch and, as we said, at recess. When you do talk with teachers, though, they understand the ability of being able to have kids finish their work and be able to get that turned in. So we're going to have some more conversations on that. I can tell you my philosophy is we need to go get those kids moving. And I think most of our principals do share that philosophy as well, but we'll continue to work on that. Would like to just give a brief update on the health curriculum. We are working on that this summer and revamping our 7th grade health curriculum into 7 modules. We're prioritizing the first module, which is mental health, and we're working with Texas A&M on that through Dr. Trammell and her work in curriculum instruction. We're working on that process right now, and should have module 1 or a couple of modules complete here in the very near future. So that curriculum work is ongoing, as is a lot of curriculum work, and you'll hear a little bit more about all the work that we're doing and revamping our curriculum at our regular board meeting at 7 o'clock.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Is that better, Chuck?
You just need to speak up, I think.
How about that? Is that better? Okay. Thank you. Okay, we done with that item?
I believe so.
You are creative. Another high-tech solution. Okay, item C2, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2018-19 budget. Dr. Ely.
Mr. Harris, members of the board, as you know, we're in budget development season. We have to, the board has to adopt a budget and set a tax rate by the August meeting or at the August meeting. So we have a couple more months of budget development still to come. And with where we are on the latest iteration here in June is Mike Martindale, the Deputy Superintendent and Chief Financial Officer, with his June update. Mr. Martindale.
I want to make sure it was on so Chuck didn't walk over and stop me.
A little unsettling.
Exactly. All righty. Again, I'm going to start at the bottom of our timeline. We've, ticking away month by month as we move toward August. We'll have our proposed final budget for the board's consideration, as well as the tax rate to support that budget. I want to mention July 25th. That's when we will receive our final certified values from the appraisal district. That's a huge driving piece with our budget. In particular, this year, since our growth still, but not at the rate that we've experienced the last couple of years. So that will play a key component in kind of drawing a number of different pieces together with our budget. That is the Wednesday after our Tuesday, July the 17th board meeting, but close enough. I think we'll have enough of those values that are no longer under review that we can probably close in on some of our property value projections. And of course, June, this evening at the 7 o'clock meeting, up for the board's consideration and possible approval is the 18-19 compensation plan. So that has your teacher salary schedule in it, as well as your pay grade plans for auxiliary, paraprofessional, and administrative professionals, as well as current employee raises and any adjustments to district contribution to benefits. So that will be at the 7 o'clock meeting. We have that on the agenda for the board's consideration. We started the process early on, and you'll remember from May and even April, the exceptional item requests from throughout the district ran us right at $1.9 million. Initially, when we started the process a month or two ago, I'd appropriate or set aside earmark $650,000 in current year budget, the 17-18 budget, to try to capture some of those things, because we really didn't have the capacity, or not projecting the capacity in the 18-19 budget to be able to manage those things. Also, on the new personnel side, we had over $5 million worth of requests from throughout the district, campuses, and departments for new personnel adds. This is above or beyond and does not include the 2.4 that we're tracking at for Welborn Middle School. In our initial projections and budget for 18-19, I'd set aside $750,000 in that for new positions. Again, this is above and beyond what it would cost us for Welborn Middle School when we started this process a couple months ago. At the May meeting, of the $650,000, we reviewed approximately $579,000 of exceptional item requests, and several of those purchases were made at the May board meeting. Furniture for various campuses, band instruments, additional band instruments for both of our high schools, replacing the stands at Consolidated High School, and we also had tennis court resurfacing as one of those items at College Station High School. So those are some of the examples that we handled previously with the $579,000 of the $650,000 that I'd set aside for exceptional items. On the personnel side, we'd approved $759,000 at that point in time. I'd set aside $750,000, so just a little bit beyond that. That included a significant amount of teachers and support folks for the special ed department. If you've heard several times about the growth in our special education numbers throughout the course of this year. I think in addition of over 300 students in the last year and a half. So we're needing to address those numbers through our new personnel items, and that encompasses a large amount of that $759,000. So number of special ed teachers at various campuses throughout the district. We did ask some core area teachers at Pecan Trail. When I opened Pecan Trail this year, didn't staff quite as many folks for sixth grade due to the effect of grandfathering, and some of our this past year sixth graders remaining at their existing intermediate, so we need to complete that staffing phase because the grandfather will work its way through the system next year at the intermediate. Also, some additional positions at College Station High School due to their increased enrollment, and I believe we had 3 total licensed specialist in school psychology. So that has to do with our special ed department as well. So that's just kind of a summary of some of the things we had looked at in May. Of course, Wellborn Middle School, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we're going to settle in almost exactly just a 2.4 million on Wellborn. That's a pretty solid number at this point in time. And that's an inclusive number that captures all your professionals, your teachers, your faculty, staff, principals, counselors, also your auxiliary folks as far as custodians. There are 6 custodians built into that 2.4 million for Wellborn Middle School. What it doesn't capture, because we manage it through a different budget, not the general fund, is like your child nutrition folks. That's a separate budget. But it does capture folks like custodians, paraprofessionals, clerical, those types of things. So it's all inclusive. There's another 200,000 that's allotted outside of payroll, and that's for your operations, turning on the lights and the air conditioning that is in that 5-year projection that I will show you later on. That number's incorporated there. The changes from last month to this one. So that's just kind of a summary. I'm going to go ahead and put both of these up. Additional positions that have been approved since last month. That number was at 759,000. The new personnel were up to just a little bit over $1 million. The difference in that, about 277,000 of additional new positions, comes with 2 dyslexia teachers that will help us serve an increasing population there, as well as it just builds us more capacity to service those kids and the loads that existing dyslexia teachers are carrying. An additional special education teacher, and that one's actually split between 2 campuses, and another school resource deputy. This is in addition to Wellborn. And when I mentioned the Wellborn number earlier, the 2.4 million, I said all inclusive. That captures school resource deputy for Wellborn. So this is in addition to, this particular position is more of a floater, I guess what we say. They won't be assigned to a campus per se. They can sub in or provide assistance at for one of the folks that we already have in place, or they're available also to touch base with our intermediate and elementaries throughout the course of the year. So that's what makes up those additional adds from last month. And I'll go back up to the exceptional item request. That 579 to 634, that is for vehicle and supplies for the additional school resource deputy that I've identified in the new personnel, if that makes sense. We have capacity now, so we try to get their vehicle and their supplies and get those here for them to have when school starts in August. And we have that capacity now to be able to handle that and get those in place.
What is the total amount that we will, of number of resource deputies we'll have next year?
There's 1 at every middle school, so 3, and at all of our high schools, that's 6, and then this one would be a 7th collectively. Oh, you're turning my microphone off. So, okay. And again, Wellborn, I've mentioned. Some other positions that are still kind of out there that we can kind of keep an eye on as we progress through the next couple of months with the budget. Of course, there were additional requests from College Station High School. We've addressed some of those, but not all of those. I'm going to skip down to District Fine Arts, a Director of Fine Arts and Coordinator of Social Studies. We have coordinators in the other 3 core areas, but not in social studies. Those 3 particular areas that I just mentioned, College Station High School, Fine Arts, and the CNI, are ones that, if we're going to be able to do, will need to be decided upon here in the very near future, because those are things that we want to make sure occur prior to next school year start. They're a little more time sensitive if we're able to find some capacity in the budget. And I'll be perfectly candid with you now, is I don't know where that capacity would come from at this point in time, just to give you a little preview. So, but I will step back to district operations, because I wanted to mention that one. Last year with operations, it's not, trying to manage those is not as time sensitive as the others. In other words, last year I believe we ended up adding about 3 operational positions in September, October after school started. And we saw how our enrollment was tracking and how our budget was tracking the first couple of months. And we were able to approve 3 additional positions. I think John utilize those primarily in HVAC techs, I believe. So that's one that I will probably watch throughout the budgeting process, see how things go with enrollment and a number of other things. Once we get school going, then I can revisit that one. It's absolutely important because you got to take care of your facilities and your stuff and those types of things. But it's one we can visit after school gets going if need to. On this particular revenue, I have what we looked at the May meeting and then any adjustments as far as this evening. On the average daily attendance and the local values, it had had ADA at 0.3, which basically is no growth on our student enrollment or attendance rate from 17-18 to 18-19. I don't have any data that would lead me to adjust that one direction or the other at this point in time. No substantial records requests for students or anything of that nature. Again, that would motivate me to move that number up or down either way. So that's one we'll continue to monitor throughout the course of July for any particular record requests through the Texas Record Exchange system, where school districts and folks request student records from one another. If I see a movement in that, then I can kind of revisit this number if I need to.
When do you typically get those?
Or
is there a-
It typically, there's not. It typically
Okay.
starts up in July, and Mr. Nugent, it can keep flowing all the way through the beginning of school, to be perfectly honest with you. So, so unless I see something substantial that motivates me, otherwise, this may very well be the number we utilize as we move forward with our budget adoption. I visited with elementary principals in particular Monday and Tuesday of last week, and we kind of maintain an informal document as far as feedback they've received about their current students for where folks may be attending next year. And that list is, is what we're looking at right now. It's only up to about 80 students, though, at this point in time that they're knowledgeable of through just informal conversation or with folks. So again, I think our best approach is to hold right there, which means basically we would have no growth for next year at this point in time. If I get some real data that motivates me, then I'll make that adjustment in the upcoming months. Local values continue to hold at 6.25%. Again, growth, but that is below our 7.2 average, 5-year average that we spoke of back in April. That number could move on us a little bit either direction between now and the 25th. As of yesterday, there was about a little over $3 billion under review. Our collective total values exceed 10. So as you can imagine, there's still significant movement on how those reviews play out over the next month. But I want to start locking that number down a little more so whenever we come back in July. So, but I don't want to. There's no reason to rush and then try to have to adjust FART next month. Interest income, I've had $700,000. Feel very comfortable in adjusting that up a couple $100,000 for this. I know. Hey,
Well
we're
done.
pushing
Well done,
2%.
Mr. Martindale.
And I'm fixing to
That was
really make it, I'm probably going to visit this number again before we adopt our final budget. But a little more capacity there, not a lot, but it's not one that's dependent on state funding, property values, or ADA. So a slight adjustment there. Co-curricular and other revenues, that's gate receipts, facility rentals, those types of things. I do anticipate adjusting those up next month, but they won't be of significance. They'll have very small impact on the budget, probably $20,000 each. So those are not, they're big numbers, but not relative to $100 and something million budget. And CHARS, this is our Medicaid reimbursement for school health and related services that are provided. The 1.6 actually amended that up for current year 17-18, so that up from 1.4. So this adjustment reflects where we're tracking current year as well. So this is Mrs. Parks and Mrs. Perry and those folks and their work with getting the reimbursement submissions in and those types of things have really turned into some positive work for us. So these are the two adjustments on the revenue side for this month. That's going to be a little over $400,000. On the appropriation side, salary adjustments, and as I mentioned earlier, that at the 7 o'clock meeting, the board has this on the agenda for consideration for approval. It had 1.13 million. I cleaned that up, increased it a little bit, 70,000, because we're putting actual salaries in to address raises and those types of things. So that's just a little tidy up from last month. What you will see as far as raises in the 18-19 compensation plan at the 7 o'clock meeting on the agenda, and then the memo and stuff, is an increase of $750 per teacher. And for all other employees, it's 1.5% off the midpoint of their particular pay grade for their position. I put a little historical here just to see where we've gone the last couple of years. If you recall, TASB kind of came aboard with us last year and did a big review for us, and they assisted us with setting up the current or the proposed compensation plan for 18-19 as well. And I think this has benefited us tremendously. So for 16-17 school year, 0-year experienced teacher was at 41.2 here in College Station ISD. That was the higher end. Last year, 17-18, or the school year we just completed, that had been adjusted up from 41.2 to 42.5. And on the compensation plan recommendation for next year for 18-19, it's going from 42.5 to 43. I put just one example in here, auxiliary pay grade 1. This is bus monitors, child nutrition workers, custodians. So 2 years ago, 16-17, we were at $8.82 an hour for those folks. Last year, we had significant shift up to try to be more reflective of the market for 17-18. This year, we moved that up to 10, and on the proposed compensation plan, that's going 10.25. So we're making adjustments in the right direction to try to reflect that market. Can't do it all at once. It's cost prohibitive. But in addition to that, when you move one particular pay grade, you're impacting the other 6 behind it. So you have to, there's a domino effect on those items. So I just want to mention that because that is at the 7 o'clock meeting on the board's agenda for consideration for approval this evening. Health insurance, this one is also a part of where we're looking to make an adjustment to contribution of one of our plans. It had 0 increase. This has a plus of $56,000. And what it does is increase the district's contribution from $351 a month per participating employee to $367 per month. This adjustment is to the employee-only TRS Active Care 1 high deductible plan. All other plans that we have in place, the district contributions over $400 now. And adjusting this one up by $16 a month per participant ensures that we have one plan that is of no cost to employees if they so choose to that one. That cost, we have about 291 participants that take this plan, $16 per month by that, it'll run us about an additional $56,000. I think we increased $10 per plan per participant last year, and it cost a little over 100, I think 150,000. So this ensures there's one of no cost available to the employees if they so choose to utilize this one. So basically, the plus 400 on the revenue projections, are, we're accounting for on the backside to make some of these adjustments. Salary adjustments in health insurance. Supplies and materials, I'm holding it right where it is right now. You've heard this several times. We are reviewing our spending trends this year, but some of our historicals, I'll be looking at adjusting some of our, some places where we have different budgets where we've historically underspent or left money on the table. We've done some zero-based with a handful of departments, not everybody. That's probably the direction we're going some point in time. But there's a way for us to be a little more efficient on that and may help us build some capacity over the next month or two. Just if we have a particular area where we're on average the last 3 or 4 years, leaving $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in the budget. There's no, we can utilize that money better elsewhere. So that's what we're looking at. When I say that, that's what I'm referring to. New personnel requests, we touched on this. This is the additional school resource deputy, dyslexia teacher, special ed. And last year we spent about a million in new personnel. That's outside of Pecan Trail. Again, Welborn Middle School, Pecan Trail last year. This struck me as I'm looking at this because you always want to do as much as possible for existing employees. And it's something I really wrestle with. But if you look at these numbers over the last 2 years, new schools, that's 3.8. New personnel plus another 2. So in essence, we've added 5.8 million of new people in 2 years. So if you think 17, 18, and going into next year, that's an additional 5.8 million. That's not counting raises of the folks we have on a payroll budget of about 90 million. It's positive we're opening new schools, but that creates what we can do with some things. That just creates opportunity. Chapter 14 recapture payment, we will settle in right at 4.9 this year. We began our year, did our budget in 17-18, we're at 5.9. That adjustment down, it really has to do with the growth in our special ed numbers because there's a weighting system in place, and that because of that significant growth in our special services numbers, that has pulled that recapture payment down. 13.9 projected currently for next year. We'll be working on that a little bit more over the next month or two. Might be a little movement on that. And as you can see, the recapture payment is our second single largest appropriation behind payroll. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Capital outlay, 300,000. I think two of the objectives as the budget evolves over the next month or two, of course, is to attempt to address the deficit as much as possible as capacity allows itself, but also to try to build some capacity back into our capital outlay number. We're in pretty good shape this year. That was adjusted to account for some of our property value projections a month or two ago. So those would be the two driving pieces that I'm really watching an eye on as things evolve the next couple of months. 478 last month, 473, just a difference of 50,000. This is our 5-year projection. It's very similar to last month. I've highlighted just the areas where we made adjustments. The interest income from 700 to 900, our SHARs from 1.4 to 1.6. And basically that plus 400 was applied to our 89.8 as far as payroll. This is the new positions I mentioned, increasing the contribution on insurance, and just a little cleanup as far as the projections on raises. So again, here are your some total appropriations. Again, just shy of 90 million on payroll on people. There's Welborn at 2.4, and of course you can see here is our recapture payment, our Chapter 41 payment at 13.9. So continue right at the 4.7 mark. Like I said, a $50,000 difference from last month. In the out years, these shifted just a tad, $30,000 to $40,000 on average, just as I made adjustments up in the revenue and appropriations for this month. So not a significant amount of movement, using the increased revenue projections to capture a couple of staffing needs that are pressing that we need to address. So things are holding where they are. Again, the big pieces will be exactly where our property values land over the next month or so, and the values that are under review and how those play out through that process. You're familiar with this. It's going to be real similar to what you saw, minus 50,000. It's 50,000 closer to the yellow line than it was last month. The yellow is 17.5%. Thank you, Mr. Harris. I was waiting for you to catch that. The gold is 17.5%. of the projected revenue number, kind of just a line as far as cash flow. The green was what we were looking at in April. You can see it's below the purple here as we were opening schools, and then it flattened out, and the purple is this month. And again, the difference here would be very similar to last year, why it kind of dips beyond what we're looking at in April is again because instead of tracking at that 7.2% on the 5-year historical of property value growth, dialed that down to 6.25, and that's why you saw that shift here. And so it's in a similar place as last month. So again, lots of opportunities that kind of pull on things, but we've prepared for this moment, and we'll keep working our way through it the next month or two. I'll be happy to field any particular questions that you guys may have. I wanted to finish on a strong note. Sorry. Intentionally put this one last. While we do wrestle with our M&O side of things, we are tracking in a positive manner as far as going to be able to pass on some returns to the taxpayer whenever we look at our tax rate for 18-19. Do anticipate us being able to reduce our INS rate by at least 1.8 cents. So that will help us as far as the overall tax rate the taxpayer will see here in our community. And again, where those values play out may even allow us to do just a tad more than that. But I think that's a comfortable projection at this point in time. So that is a positive. While we wrestle with the maintenance and operations side, the work of many through the course of time we'll begin to see the fruits of that work on the INS side. Questions? It'll be all
Questions?
right.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Questions?
Martindale is very thorough.
Yes, he was.
Does that mean I spoke too long?
No, you're very
Okay.
thorough.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You know, given the fact that we're given $13.9 million back to the state, we had planned on a $2.4 million outlay for the new school. I mean, I think we have for years figured that that would be a part of the budget and that would be a hit at those budget times, especially when we saw the graph. But you managed to, and I know people are not going to understand this, but I mean, we're talking about a $2.3 million budget deficit given all the negative. And I want to commend the district on getting it to that point because I can't believe.
Actually, it's 4.7.
Are you talking current year or are you talking
Well,
next year?
it's 4.73, okay, but you
Correct.
take out the 2.4, right? For
I got you.
Okay, I know it's Carol's math, okay?
No, I got you. I'm sorry. It was very similar to 17, 18 numbers, so that's
But
why
what
I
I'm
was-
saying is, given the planning that we've done over the years, and I mean, it is tough to plan, in my opinion, a $13.9 million give back to the state. It's just, when we were talking before the meeting and talking about some of the other districts that are dealing with much higher returns to the state, for us to be looking at $2.3 million at this point, while I know that's nothing to celebrate, I do want to commend the district for getting it to that point because I really thought it would be, you know, even over time, I've thought it won't come in. It's just very humbling, I guess.
There's still lots of work, and there will be a number of things of significance evolve over the next month or two. So,
Ms. Baird, I appreciate that. I guess I'd like to just visit a little bit about school funding in the nature of our system in this state where you're basically guaranteed an amount per child of targeted revenue that you don't get to exceed, because if you exceed that, it ends up going back to the state through recapture. As you grow and add students to your district, that's the way you get more money in a school system. But when you're having to, because of all those new kids, 2,000 kids in a 3-year period, and you're building 5 schools in 5 years, you've seen those costs that have built up. When we get these schools opened and we get to move forward and we're just adding kids, not adding buildings, our economic outlook gets a lot rosier. It really is a bubble in the system of extremely rapid growth that we've looked at over the last 5 years that we're coming through right now. And there is a legislative session in 2019. There is another legislative session in 2021. I'm not optimistic that we're going to see a great windfall of increase of school funding or state participation in school funding, but we have that hope. And I know that we will be communicating with our elected representatives about the ability to more fully fund from the state's perspective public education and what that can really mean for taxpayers in our community and across the state. So, thank you.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's important too that you add that this 13.9 million, because I want to continue to say this to the public, is that $13.9 million does not go to specific other schools. It goes back to the general fund, which then the legislators get to decide how they want to spend that. And it may or may not be in school funding. And clearly, over the last few years, it has not been towards our schools. So our schools or schools that are less fortunate, because I think that's what we've all been led to believe in the past, and it doesn't work that way. And I think it's important to reiterate that.
And I think that those folks would tell you it does go to schools, but what it does is replaces the state's financial commitment that they would make and allows them to reallocate their funds to other areas. So again, as Dr. Ely mentioned, next year is a legislative year, and so maybe some work on an equalized wealth level would only benefit us collectively as a district, because that will influence the recapture, not necessarily more revenue, as opposed to what we are not to
Yeah, it is.
get back.
It's akin to me telling my son, "I'll pay you $15 for going out and mowing the yard," and then as soon as he does it, lowering his allowance by $15. And that's essentially what they're doing to the schools, and it is abhorrent trickery, is what it is.
Abhorrent trickery.
Abhorrent trickery, and I could come up with some more choice words, but as we know,
Let's not.
that's not. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr.
Well, I didn't want
Harris.
to cut you off. If
We're good.
you want to comment on abhorrent trickery.
He lost me at
To me, I just, Jeff math, I look at the bottom line on this quite literally. And while the red in 2020 to 21 is concerning, I do see enough play in some of the numbers that we control in I'll say the middle tier of boxes that lets me think, if we see it actually coming, that we can make some hard choices and do something about it so that we don't cross that line potentially. Now, it's not the end of the world if we do, but it's not ideal either. And then I think those are fairly conservative estimates in the top, those percentage numbers, based on our history. Do you feel that those are pretty conservative, or are they?
I would have told you yes until this year.
This year, yeah.
Yes, sir. And I believe in 1920, I was even utilizing 7% originally. So that's what makes this year interesting. And I need to let current values play out, and that may give me a little more indication as what I might be willing to project in the out years. So I think a number of things. This does help us keep an eye on things and plan accordingly for the out years. We're fortunate that we have positioned ourselves with a fund balance that provides a support in time of need. So we position ourselves to get through this particular spot. I do think once we work our way through 1819 and 1920, I think there will be opportunities for us to have conversations about potential other revenue opportunities. but that's for down the road and, you know, as we get in the midst of a legislative session.
Okay. Yeah,
Would it be enough to get rid of red on the excess deficit? 'Cause, I mean,
19 for
the
19,
20 and 2020 looks very exciting at a $1.281 million deficit. I mean, compared to what we have.
I think 1920, depending on the legislative year, could be challenging for us. But I also think that 2020, you have to think we're not opening a school that year. And so I think the more we move out from that, those significant increases of operational cost, it allows us to get our feet back under us a little bit. Again, positive things. We're growing. We're adding to to our community, and that's positive for our community, for the kiddos and everyone else. You have to work to manage the cost and getting that going. I think next year will provide us some opportunity to have a couple of different conversations as we kind of see what we can do to manage that number even farther. And yes, in 20, it's difficult to say, Mr. Wesson, because of the legislative years, you simply don't know what impact those are going to have. So I hesitate to say one way or the other. If they do something with the equalized wealth level, which is what generates our recapture payments, I mean, some movement on that would have significant impact for us in a positive way. They set that recapture level at $514,000 of appraised value per kiddo. Current year 17-18, we're at $544,000. So that's where your recapture payment's calculated, is that tax revenue you collect off that difference. Next year, we're tracking about $600,000 of appraised value per kiddo. So again, that kind of moves again, which as your enrollment and stuff shifts, but that's why you see this swell in our recapture payment, because a little lower growth on the enrollment side, but we had real strong values in 17-18 because those calculations lag a year back. That was way more than you wanted, but apologize.
I think that's great. Assuming, of course, they move the number up.
This is true. I should have been clear on that,
Right.
Mr. Harris.
And I think it's important, you alluded to it, but it's important to point out that this was all planned and these deficits were planned. We knew these schools were coming. And quite frankly, the people who served on this board before we all did, I think did a fantastic job building up that fund balance in anticipation of these deficit balances. And what we're seeing is, quite frankly, they, along with the work that you all have done in the last few years, have gotten it really close, because you start looking, when we stop opening all these schools is right when the fund balance excess, I don't want to use the term depleted because we're still talking a fund balance of almost 25 million, so it's still a significant amount, but those things are coming together quite nicely. So I think kudos to the group that had the foresight to make that happen and make this as good as it is for us, being able to run these deficit budgets to open these schools.
Mr. Harris, I appreciate that. I think it goes to the difficulty of creating an annual budget with an eye for the future. We have needs now. We have needs all over this district. And how can we meet those needs now, but still make sure that we are in a position that those who come after us have the resources they need to be able to do the things that we become accustomed to in the school system. And appreciate those who have come before us. And all of us around this table want to make sure that we're doing everything we can for those who come after us, be able to enjoy the types of things that we have in College Station ISD in the future.
Anything else on the budget? Okay, item C. Thank you. Item C3, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to board policy FNF local regarding student drug testing. Dr. Ely.
Mr. President, members of the board, we are coming once again to have a discussion regarding what is Board Policy FNF, local and potential adjustment to that policy for the purpose of instituting a policy of random student drug test for those students in the school district in grades 9 through 12 who are involved in extracurricular activities, who choose to park on our campuses, and for those whose parents would opt them into that program. As you know, we've discussed this for the last few months about this. We brought this to you, quite frankly, because people in the community and people in the school district have brought it to us. They believe, as I do, that we have an opportunity here to provide some real appropriate ways for students wishing to not be involved in the consumption of alcohol and illegal drugs, a way for them to be able to say no, especially those who are at the high school level and involved, as I said, in these extracurricular activities. We have done a great deal of work, and I'll say Mr. McIntyre has done a great deal of work in looking at policies from around the state, talking with our coaches, our sponsors, our directors of extracurricular activities, and trying to put together something for your consideration that would, for a point of conversation, for us to hopefully move forward with a decision on in the near future. I think our goal would be, if we wanted to move forward with this for the 18-19 school year, that we would like to come back next month in July and have the board consider this approval. So what we have for you is, you've seen presentations in PowerPoint format. You've seen kind of some side-by-sides of existing policy and new policy. What we have this here is in policy form. And so Mr. McIntyre is going to kind of take you through the specifics. So what I'm going to do is, so that you have something to write on, I'm going to give you a copy of what Mr. McIntyre is going through here. You would like to make some notes on those as well. So with that, I'll give it over to Mr. Greg McIntyre, Chief Administrative Officer. Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. Really, this is our first chance to take a look at the draft board policy. What I did was just go through and highlight some of the phrases of the key points that we've talked about over the last few months, to be quite honest with you, and really just kind of walk us through that, and so we take a look at what the policy is. Typically, where we have started, whenever we've talked about this, is really this section that talks about purpose. That the purpose is certainly the health and safety for our students, to deter student use, give students a credible means to resist peer pressure, and of course to be able to provide information to parents. That's a little bit further down in the policy, just from the way that TASB formats it, but I think it's an important place for us to start, is to always start with our purpose. From there, you can see just a little bit above that, where it talks about a drug testing program for students in grades 9 through 12 who choose to participate in either school-sponsored extracurricular activities, or those students who request a parking permit. And just a little bit lower, went ahead and highlighted, and for those parents who sign a request for volunteer participation in the program as well. So those are the three areas: extracurriculars, parking, and then parents who want to volunteer their children for the program. And so that gets us really that first piece of the draft policy for the random student drug testing. A little bit below that, it talks about the distribution of the policy, and that the district would provide each parent and student a copy of the policy and consent form. And of course, we would conduct orientation meetings with parents and students interested in participating. We do that prior to the beginning of each semester. A little bit lower, it talks about how student attendance, this is at the top of page 3, student attendance at the orientations would be mandatory. However, parent attendance would be optional. Certainly invited to attend, certainly can if they want to, but for students to participate, in extracurriculars, parking pass, and so forth, that they would be required to attend an orientation meeting, and like we said, prior to the beginning of each semester. The consent information is there as well. I went in and highlighted the piece because this question has come up before. If appropriate consent is not given, then the student shall not be allowed to participate in the extracurricular activities or to receive a parking permit. And so that's the part where they have to opt in and provide consent for the being entered into the pool for random student drug testing. A little bit further in the policy, it talks about the use of results and that those results would used only to determine eligibility for the parking permit or participation in extracurricular activities, and that positive drug tests would not be used to impose disciplinary sanctions. So this part is being separated from that, and again, restricted to just the voluntary participation in extracurriculars and in parking. Talks a little bit further about confidentiality, that those drug test results would be confidential and be disclosed only to the student's parents, and designated district officials who need the information in order to administer the program. Certainly the testing laboratory would be a certified drug testing laboratory. And in this case, what we're talking about is students providing urine samples for the random student drug testing. We would also provide the exact or a list of the exact substances which are being tested. We've outlined those in, I think, the 3 previous workshops we've had here over the past 3 months. And then, of course, it talks a little bit about the collection procedures, what that procedure would look like. And that so far as the number of tests, that it could be conducted on as many as 9 dates throughout the year, and no less than 40 students and no more than 90 students participating should be randomly selected for each random test date. A refusal to test would also be interpreted as a positive. And it does talk a little bit, I didn't highlight this piece, but it says if a student is absent on the day of random test, a sample shall be collected on the next testing date. Confirmation of positive results, we've talked about this piece before as well, that an initial positive test would be confirmed by a second test of the same specimen. Upon receiving those results, the district would schedule a meeting with the students, the student parent if the student is under 18, and the coach or sponsor of that activity. It does talk about the medical review officer process as well, so far as the communication that MRO would have regarding any prescriptions with the child's doctor and the pharmacy. A little bit further, that we would notify student and parent of drug and alcohol resources available in the area. I believe that list has been sent to you within the past week to 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And so we do have those resources and contact information available. And then, of course, after that, it outlines the consequences for first offense. And we're on our last page. First offense would be 15 calendar days. Second offense, I highlighted the 30 calendar days. And then the third offense is 1 calendar year. All of those pieces are in the draft policy. And then last, if there's any appeals that a parent would want to file, we would follow our existing FNG local policy. So I would just say with that, I think that the draft policy hits all the points that we've discussed over the past several months. And if there's any questions or comments, be happy to answer those.
Okay, so I just noticed on that appeal, on the appeals,
Yes.
is there, do we have any indication as to how long the appeal would take? And so that we can be, give that some time, like, that the student feels like we can have it within so many days or so many weeks. I mean, I don't even have any idea what that would look like as far as an appeal process.
There are timelines associated with FNG local and our current policy with regard to how many days that the appeal needs to be filed from the time that the incident occurred, and then also the number of days that an administrator has to meet with the parent to hear that appeal, and then another timeline in which that administrator has to respond in writing to that. So for that first, to be honest with you, with that first offense being so short in 15 days, if you were to follow the current policy so far as time to meet and then time to make a decision, it would exceed that 15-day total.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that
Okay.
it goes back to the F and G local
Right.
policy. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You foresee any difficulty in the first offense appeal period being longer potentially than the actual suspension period?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
I mean, really, they're not given an effective unless the timeline is accelerated. I mean, those are maximums,
Those are maximums. You're
not
correct.
not mandated times. But I mean, the reality, if there's an appeal under FNG local, I think it's incumbent upon us to
Expedite?
expedite it so that it's meaningful for students. Otherwise, and you know, I can't, as we sit here, think of a reason after you go through that process that the appeal would be meritorious or victorious or granted, or I guess whatever the wording is. But I'm sure there's something that could come up that may cause that. And if you come up with that on day 17, well, they've already served the time. So it's, I guess there's some, it goes off the record would be something. So the next time it would be a first offense. So there is something to it. But
Correct.
missing 15 days of activity, depending on the timing of that, could be a significant penalty in and of itself.
So that, I think that'll initially start off with 15 school days, which is basically 3 weeks. Assuming you're going to school 5 days a week and you're in that time of the year, you don't have any, shorter weeks. This was changed to calendar days at the, after feedback from our folks. So they basically have shortened it from 3 weeks to 2 weeks. We could lengthen that first offense, but it would be, following this line of thinking, we'd be lengthening because of the possibility of somebody coming in and grieving this. And the feedback that we've received from our folks is they'd rather see it that 2 week, that 15 days. So I'm kind of where I find myself is, okay, it is a shorter first window for that first offense. And I can see where they're coming up with that, and while the trade-off for the potential appeal and what that could do, I don't know is a reason for us to lengthen that first offense. And then what we would need to do is, as Mr. Harris said, was work to expedite any appeals that we would have in those particular situations.
I'm okay with that as long as there's kind of that understanding. I mean, the alternative would be let them continue to participate pending the appeal. But then we've all seen that at professional sports level where they play a game to affect timing.
And how long does it take to schedule that appeal?
Right. And a couple other points. One, I know that the genesis of this was when the administration was approached by, well, some school personnel as well as members of the public. Have you let the people who approached you have a chance to review this? And I know these are some folks in our extracurriculars areas.
Yeah, yes, they have. And you're correct, Mr. Harris. Yes, people have talked to me in the community over the last year to 18 months about this, made appointments to see me and talk about this. And, the real genesis came when our two athletic coordinators asked to meet with me earlier this semester, in the spring semester. And I didn't know what it was about, but they wanted to talk about this. Both of them came from districts that had drug testing policies for students involved in extracurricular activities. They saw the benefit of it, and they thought it would be a benefit for College Station ISD. So they came and sat down and talked with me about it, and that's why it ended up on a board agenda for our discussion over the last several months. We've since followed up with both our athletic coordinators, other coaches, other drill team, and fine arts and extracurricular sponsors and directors to get their feedback on that, and all of them were able to have an ability to weigh in on both the merits of having this type of policy and some of the specifics that you see before you this evening. And so, yes, we've been able to go back and get that type of information, and also at our comprehensive high schools, we've talked about it with our leadership teams. We've talked about it with English teachers and math teachers, department leads, and not just the folks who are involved in extracurricular activities to get their input on it. And I will say that it is overwhelmingly a majority of folks are in favor of moving forward with this based on the potential positive benefit it can have for students and families in our community.
Depending on the timing of that input, I do think it is a good idea to make sure that some of those key stakeholders, particularly those athletic coordinators and the other people who head up the major program areas, have a chance to see the actual language and provide feedback. I'm very interested in getting feedback, and I know you are, and you've probably already done this, from the people who are from districts that have already implemented these types of policies and had to live under them, because it's quite frankly new to me. So I can't anticipate very well what I don't know. I don't know what I don't know type thing.
Yes, sir.
And then the other thing is to add, ever since we started talking about this, I have consistently, even since the last meeting, had several people applaud the effort and say it's needed, and they're thankful we've done it. I've yet to have somebody tell me, don't do this, and I'm curious to hear if the rest of you have had any feedback. All positive?
I personally haven't had anybody say anything negative. I mean, I think there's people who've questioned the cost of it, which I think on the whole is, I'll be honest, is probably not as much as I thought it would have been before we started this. But I haven't had one person come up to me and say, I think we shouldn't do this for this reason. So it sounds like that's the feedback Clark's getting within the district as well. So
Mine's been, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I'm just going to say it's been overwhelmingly positive, not all positive like it sounds like for y'all, but there have been a few people, I mean, very, very few who've been negative on it.
For what purpose?
You got to be a little careful. I mean, government overreach and, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I understand
I
that.
get it, yeah.
You know, one person who has, and I know I've read a few of the studies, and I understand what they're saying just as far as questioning the effectiveness. In fact, I've called, and it's led me to call friends of mine who are on boards around the state who do this. And I wanted to know, because, you know, the point of this is not to catch kids.
Right.
But at the same, you know, it's to help, and I think we all understand that. But at the same time, if you're drug testing several hundred kids and no one fails a drug test, you know, I said, you know, I almost everyone I've called, I've said, what percentage of kids fail your test? And it has been an incredibly small percentage, one that just shocked me. I mean, we're easily low single digits. And part of me, you know, you want to go, man, that's great. But, you know, from what I hear as the father of, well, only one high school student now, but with two who have graduated. I'm sorry?
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, 2 in college. That's great.
Yeah. Welcome.
But high school was much cheaper.
It's a much cheaper alternative.
From what I hear from my kids and their friends and coaches and teachers, the percentage of kids using is much higher than 1 or 2%.
Yep.
And I mean, there's a reason people have come to us. I mean, if we were to talk to this officer back here, put a mic on you right now, I think he's going to tell us it's probably a little bit higher than that, than 1 or 2%. But when I've asked him, so is it worth it? And of course, it's a good point. They said, well, we don't know the percentage of kids who it is deterred because of this.
Right.
And which is one of the main points here. Mm-hmm. So again, when this was brought up, I'm going a little bit past the question of just feedback. I heard this and I thought, no brainer. Yes. From what I hear going on around here, yes. I've been just personally a little bit of pause just in some of my reading, but again, if at the end of the day when I look at it, I'm like, I would rather err on this side than the other, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So some of the feedback that we have gotten as we have talked with folks who've been through this before is that in the first year of implementation, you will see much higher percentages because it's the first time and people don't know. Mm-hmm. And what you're hearing about in the other board members that you've talked about is people who have had this implemented for a number of years. And so
yes,
that number does get lower. And I think it's because people realize that, yes, they are testing and yes, the tests do work. Mm-hmm. That's my read of the situation. And you're correct. We don't know. We can't calculate the ones that didn't do it because of the drug testing.
But I think we can, you hate to assume, but that's probably a fairly, maybe not a significant number, but it's there. It's a real number.
I think the other thing that I'm happy to see, it's the education and counseling resources that are available. Because I think some of the research that maybe you're alluding to, that was one of the key things. They said testing alone is largely ineffective. Mm-hmm. So if you have the testing coupled with the education and the resources, and then most importantly, an appropriate culture and environment in your institutions, that it can be very effective. It's just another piece that to the puzzle, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I was very happy to see those resources. So thank you for uncovering those and getting them to us.
I don't know if I want to get too caught up in the language, but just right here, the first thing we see, and I guess I've just been thinking random drug testing program, and I'm seeing here mandatory. Mm-hmm. And we've been talking about, we're going to test us up to a certain percentage of 9th through 12th graders. Do we have that number anywhere in here?
So we went from percentages to numbers, and so that's on page 3 of 5. No, wait, where is that, Mr. McIntyre? Numbers.
No less than 40 and no more than 90.
Page 4 or 5.
Where is that?
Top of page 4.
Got it. There we go.
Randy
Okay, gotcha. For each one. Okay.
And just to recall the conversation we had, kids who are in Skills USA and they park on campus and they play baseball. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's one kid that counts 3 times. So we're trying to figure out the percentage. Is the percentage of that kid a duplicated account, non-duplicated account? So we looked at our high schools, and we looked at the number of times that they would be there and how long it would take to move them down. And we figured that, low 40 on the low end and upper to 90 on the upper end, and that's contemplating having a third high school eventually. So that's 20 to 30 kids per testing time is what we're talking about. Half male, half female. That's what we're thinking. It doesn't specify that it would be half and half, but that was our thinking going into those numbers that you see there.
I got a question. I apologize if it's been said before, but if a student tests positive on the first offense, does that increase or decrease or have any effect on the next time that we're doing drug testing?
For students who test positive, they would be included in each subsequent testing date. Yes.
Through the end of that academic year.
Through the end of that academic year.
So in essence, we could be decreasing new students if that is.
decreasing new students because that student is already included. We could, but I think we've given ourselves enough
Wiggle room enough
discretion
there.
here between 40 to 90 that we'd be able to make those adjustments.
I know you've said it, but for clarity, that the kid that's doing the 3 activities, his name's in the hat one time.
One time.
Okay. And you're looking for action in July?
Yes, sir, that's what if we want to be able to go ahead and implement this in the 2018-19 school year, we would need action in July.
Okay. I know Ms. Nolan would appreciate that as well, so. Okay.
So I guess the only other question I had, the student is absent on the day of the random test. Will they know they had been selected for the random test at that point? So let's say we're randomly drug testing board members and I'm chosen, but I don't show up for the board meeting that night. I would automatically be included on the next time that random occurred, but I would not necessarily know that I had been selected the first time
Correct.
around.
That is correct.
Okay.
So you won't be able to prep as well.
Well, yeah, but that's really, that would be my worry,
yeah,
was all of a
right.
sudden that somebody's name would come out and then
Right.
all of a sudden the student would just say, well, I'm now going to miss the rest of the day and
Right.
not go
Right.
whatever. Okay. That explains it. Thank you.
Good question.
Yep. Anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, then we are adjourned and we'll be back at 7.